Hello, I'm Kevin Anderson. I'm the pastoral intern here at Love of Christ Lutheran Church, and I will be preaching this Sunday, the 20th Sunday after Pentecost, and we're going to take a closer look at our first reading, our Old Testament reading for the day, and that comes from the second chapter of Genesis. So kind of some background on the text before we get to it. There are two creation stories present in the book of Genesis. The first one, which you might be familiar with both. The first is a very ordered creation. You have the first day, you have the second day, third day, and you have this rhythm present, that there is evening, God creates, and there's morning, and there's this flow to the whole 6 days that happens, and then God rests on the seventh day. Some very important things to note. There are some similarities between these texts, and how those similarities are addressed is just a little bit different. And important to note, in both of these, God speaks and things are created. There's this God is talking that is present in both of these texts. However, in the first story, you have this very ordered way of looking at creation. There is nothing, God creates something out of nothing, and then we move down to the heavens and the earth, and we move to the waters and the sky, and all of these things. We move down, kind of like a hierarchy of how creation, and kind of a closing in. We go from very big to very small. But the point of the story, of course, as we know, is that God is the one that is creating. And in Genesis chapter 2, we get more of a detailed story, kind of a narrative. There is no mention of distinct days. There's no rhythm that is present as there is in Genesis chapter 1. Another key thing to note is that you get the formations of humans from dust. And while these stories share a lot of the same main ideas, the way in which these ideas are presented come to us a little bit different. Now, before we get to the text for this Sunday, this is kind of how Genesis 2 unfolds. Genesis 2:4 tells us these are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created, right? So you get this kind of, not this day to day, but this kind of a more of an unfolding of a story of generations. So in Genesis 2, we get the creation of the heavens and the earth. There's a stream that rises from the earth, and that stream flows out and waters the world. God forms man, Adam, from dust and breathes the breath of life into that person. God makes the Garden of Eden. Trees grow, food is there. And then there's also mention of the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. There's a specific note about a river that divides into 4 branches, and there's 4 names. It's a very detailed description of what is happening with this river and the names that are present there. And of course, we know that God tells Adam to eat freely, but do not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So let's get into our text for this Sunday. Then the Lord said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make him a helper as a partner." So out of the ground the Lord formed every animal of the field and every bird of the air, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. Kind of interesting how much power and freedom that the first man has in this text. The man gave names to all cattle and to the birds of the air and to every animal of the field, but for the man there was not found a helper as a partner. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept. Then he took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. And the rib that the Lord had taken from the man he made into a woman, and brought her to the man. Then the man said, This at last is bone of my bone, and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, for out of man this one was taken. Therefore a man leaves his father and his mother and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked, and they were not ashamed. So the creation story that we have in Genesis 1 and 2, if you look at the kind of original context of these stories, in the ancient Near East cultures, there is all kinds of creation stories. And there are stories of how humans have come into existence. Some of that is out of chaos. Some of that is out of boredom. There's all kinds of reasons why human beings have been created. And so there's a few important things for these creation stories that we have in Genesis for us to remember. And the first is that this is a God that creates out of love. This isn't a God that is creating human beings out of boredom. This isn't human beings being brought forth out of war or chaos or anything like that. Rather, this is a story about God who is the creator, the primary actor, who is in relationship with the first things, animals, life, water, all of it. God is in relationship, very connected to all of creation. And we get those same elements in the creation story in Genesis chapter 1. I think also important for this story is the recognition that we were made to be in relationship, right? There's this intimacy between God and the first man, Adam. And then out of that, you have even more intimate creation where God puts the man to sleep, removes a rib, and we have a woman that comes from this. So all of these things are very, very, very relational. They're very intimate and they're very connected, right? And the whole connection of creation to God, all of it, and humans, is very present, right? It's very personal. It's very intimate that the creator of the universe is very present in all things. There isn't a detachment, so to speak. And I think that's something for us to really think about as we think about our own choices that we make in our everyday lives. How are the choices we making? How are they a reminder? Are they reflecting the reality that we are connected to the Creator deeply? And this connection is prevalent, right? And the first man says it. This at last is bone of my bones. There's this recognition that the relationship between the first man and the first woman presented in this story is deep, is personal. It's bone of my bones. It's the very essence of me is connected to these people. We are highly relational creatures. And that is not an accident. That is not a mistake. That's in the very design of creation itself. And there's also this interesting note here in the last verse for our text. And that is that they were both naked and they were not ashamed. And that this is a glimpse of what it's like to be in perfect relationship with God, right? The first man is born with this freedom, and he uses that freedom and he names the animals. He's a part in the creation, the naming of creation. And then there's this, the woman who is there as well. They are deeply connected to one another, and they have no clothes on, and they're not ashamed of this. This is what it's like to be in relationship with God. There is no shame. There's freedom. There's this connection of things that is happening here. And we know in Genesis chapter 3 of what is to come, that the temptation to eat the fruit directed by the snake is too much. And this whole created order takes a very different turn. And so I encourage us to think deeply about how we understand our own story. It's important for us to know where we have come from. Right? I think about children who have been adopted and how there is a wrestling that takes place often with these kids that they're trying to make sense of their own story. They're trying to frame who they are. It's important for them to understand the why questions. And I think it's important for us to understand the why questions too. Why were we created? How were we created? Well, it's important for us to remember that we are deeply connected to the Creator itself. We are deeply connected to God. We are deeply connected to God's self. And that is present from the very opening of the Bible that we have today. So blessings to you as we journey towards Sunday where we get to worship. Thank you.